what he liked so much and what we all liked so much about To Catch a Thief it was a typical Hitchcock movie. It had everything in it.
I think To Catch a Thief is one of the rare films of my grandfather's where so many of his popular themes from other movies are all brought into one. You have Grace Kelly as the cool blonde. You have Cary Grant as the innocent man who is wronged. You have the conversations over food.
Oh, it's wonderful. And the pastry is as light as air.
You have the subtleties, you have the glamour, and you have the mother.
His name is Roby, and for my money, he's a real man. Not one of those milksops you Jenny take up with.
The mother that is meddlesome to a point, but also charming at the same time.
Mr. Burns, I asked you a question.
It had suspense, it had a love story, it had great stars, and I don't think there's anything, that it lacked.
The title To Catch a Thief comes from the axiom, set a thief to catch a thief, which here is really given a double meaning. It's really something of the pretext for the film, or in Hitchcock's case, what we would call the MacGuffin, because we're really not all that concerned with catching the actual cat burglar. What we're concerned with is watching and waiting to see how Cary Grant is going to be caught by Grace Kelly, because she is trying to attract him, trying to lure him in, and trying to get him to seduce her. But all the while, she's seducing him.
You sent for me?
Yes, I thought we might go for a swim. Or if you're not athletic, sunbathing.
I think I can manage to stay afloat, thank you.
In 1950, Alfred Hitchcock bought the rights to David Dodge's novel To Catch a Thief. He initially bought it to make for Transatlantic Pictures, which was the company that he formed with Sidney Bernstein in the 1940s. But later, when he went to Paramount and had made Rear Window, he decided to bring To Catch a Thief to Paramount and make it there, where John Michael Hayes had already written the screenplay for Rear Window for him. Now, John Michael Hayes was absolutely wonderful at writing comedy, and that's why Hitchcock thought he would be perfect for To Catch a Thief. John Michael Hayes always said that plotting was not his greatest talent, but dialogue was. And this really came out of his early career writing for the radio. And this was what drew Alfred Hitchcock to him, was this bright, quick, crisp style of dialogue that John Michael Hayes possessed.
All evening long, you only looked at my mother, never at me.
I kissed you, didn't I?
I kissed you.
I wasn't looking at your mother then.
You were thinking about her. Otherwise, you never would have let me say goodnight so easily.
To Catch a Thief was written in 1954, and at the time, scripts had to be submitted by the studio upon their completion to the Production Code Administration, known as the PCA. And at the time To Catch a Thief was made, Joseph Breen was in charge of the PCA. And when the screenplay was submitted for approval, he immediately objected to all the sexual innuendo that was going on between Cary Grant's and Grace Kelly's character.
I have a feeling that tonight you're going to see one of the Riviera's most fascinating sights. I was talking about the fireworks.
Another thing that Joe Breen cautioned about was any of the scenes on the beach, they would have to be very careful not to show any bikinis. Joseph Breen was also very concerned about what was referred to as the chip gag, which is where Cary Grant meets Grace Kelly by first dropping a casino chip down the front of a woman's dress. Breen was absolutely concerned over whether they would emphasize the woman's cleavage too much, and so he cautioned against that, but he also cautioned against the suggestion that Cary Grant might look like he is poised to retrieve the chip from the woman's dress. So this was a no-no, and they were quickly warned about that.
How much of a list do you need?
Only the top half dozen names.
Anything else?
Oh, the addresses, habits, whatever you've got. Descriptions of the stones and settings.
One of the disappointments about the screenplay was John Michael Hayes had written this wonderful sequence that Hitchcock had designed, which was a chase, which was going to conclude at the end of the Nice flower market scene, where Cary Grant would come to the street and there would be a carnival procession going on, and Cary Grant would jump onto one of these floats. And Cary Grant was going to hide inside this enormous head of King Neptune while the police were chasing after him. As a result of being inside this enormous head, the float begins to go out of control, and there's all kinds of pandemonium until the float is finally wrecked. And it was going to be an additional $30,000 to the budget just to shoot this sequence, and Hitchcock just decided to drop it.
When my father decided to make To Catch a Thief, he had already made Dial M for Murder with Grace Kelly. That was their first picture together. And then they had done Rear Window. So they knew each other, and they knew how each other worked, and it was altogether a very happy reunion.
Grace Kelly had such a persona of a very elegant woman, and so I think For her to become the, quote, Princess of Monaco, no one would have been surprised because she was able to carry off that sort of image in her films. Grace Kelly was probably my grandfather's all-time favorite actress as well as person. He and my grandmother both adored her for her career and just who she was. And when she met Prince Rainier after To Catch a Thief and pretty much never worked again in the movies, I think it was a loss to him, and I think it was a loss to the public.
To Catch a Thief was sad in one way is that it was his last movie with Grace Kelly. He had found a script called Marnie, which Grace loved.
She really wanted to do it, but she had to turn it down. And she wrote to my grandfather telling him how sorry she was that she could not make Marnie, how she really wanted to do it, but that her first responsibility was to her family and to her adopted country.
May I ask you a personal question?
I've been hoping you would.
What do you expect to get out of being so nice to me?
Probably a lot more than you're willing to offer.
I know.
My memories of Cary Grant, he's one of the kindest, sweetest people I'd ever known. He was always very sweet to me from the time I think I knew him, probably from when I was 12 on up. And he had a great sense of humor, and he and my father got along very well. And he was just a very warm, wonderful person.
When my grandfather was casting To Catch a Thief, the only one that he wanted for the role was Cary Grant. But Cary Grant was at a time in his career where he really did not want to make any more pictures. So when my grandfather approached him on it, he turned him down, but then after persuasion decided that it was something that he just could not give up, that it was something he wanted to do. He was with one of his favorite directors. He was going to be with one of his favorite leading ladies. So it was a situation which it was win for everyone. And after To Catch a Thief, it was such a great experience for everyone that Cary Grant did continue on making films, including North by Northwest.
Just a minute, Mr. Burns. Weren't we going to...
When we what? Going to what?
Well, last night we discussed going up. Up.
In Catch a Thief, he was working with actors he had worked with before, which he liked. He didn't like working with new people. John Williams he had used in Dial M for Murder, and he was also in the Paradine case.
Francie must have known about you all along.
She guessed today. You must sleep soundly.
I do.
Hitchcock also enjoyed working with Jessie Royce Landis. She turns in a wonderfully comedic performance as Mrs. Stevens in To Catch a Thief, and he would cast her again to play Cary Grant's mother the next time in North by Northwest.
Well, what a wonderful surprise.
Somehow I can't get worked up over it.
I think my grandfather's feelings about the word family go beyond just his personal life into his professional life. On this particular film, To Catch a Thief, the theme of family was just as strong as it always was for my grandfather. He had the same crew that he always had working with him in the south of France on their location shooting. My grandmother was with him. My mom, unfortunately, was not because she was expecting my younger sister at the time. But he had Cary Grant, who he admired and very much loved, and the same for Grace Kelly. So it was just one of those situations that I think he really was happy in.
My real name is John Rogan. I haven't stolen a piece of jewelry in 15 years.
What are your plans now?
Well, no one believes me, but the police are chasing the wrong man. Someone's got to start chasing the right one.
Let me do something to help you.
This movie was one of the few where my grandfather actually shot half of it on location in the south of France. The other part was shot at Paramount. And I think to his credit, you would never know that it was half and half because everything blended so well. Everything was so planned out before. Every shot was so planned out. So by the time it came down to him actually shooting, to him the picture had already been made.
First element that was important was for a group of us to go to the south of France to find the various locations, because we knew that all the exteriors would be shot there. So early on in the spring, I think it was sometime in March, Herbie Coleman, the second unit director, and Bob Burks, the cinematographer, Mac Johnson, our production designer, and I made the trip to Paris and then on down to Cannes and toured the whole area around the south of France, looking for various locations. We had not planned to shoot any interiors there, though we did do a little filming in the Carlton Hotel. Finding locations in the south of France wasn't particularly difficult because it's all there and it's all so beautiful. The only one exception that I keep recalling is that we were looking for the house where Cary Grant would be living. And we found just a spectacular place, we thought, not far out of Cannes, just a couple of miles, and situated on a bluff that overlooked the Mediterranean. It was absolutely gorgeous, and the view was spectacular. But when Hitch came a couple of months later, and we started showing him all the places we'd seen, we took him up to this spot, and that morning it was fogged in so heavily we couldn't find the gate posts of the estate. So Hitch wouldn't even get out of the car. So we never went back to look at it again, even in good weather. So he says, no. Then we went off in another direction and took another house up in the hills. We had certain problems with the French, with the language. Brigitte Aubert, not so much, but Charles Vanel was a real difficult situation because he did not speak any English, and he had great difficulty even speaking it phonetically with the cue cards, just a couple of words at a time.
A most unhappy affair, eh, Ruby?
I think he was dubbed at the end completely.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most important announcement we have ever been privileged to make. This theater is now being readied to present VistaVision.
The film was shot in VistaVision because that was Paramount's answer to CinemaScope. They had come up with the idea of shooting film in a horizontal fashion, pulling 2 frames at a time instead of 1. There were pictures ahead of ours that were done in VistaVision, but they particularly wanted this one in VistaVision because of the colorful backgrounds in Cannes and so on. One of the problems it caused was for close-ups and keeping the background in focus, which is what Paramount studio executives were dying to get. They did not want to see the background go out of focus. Well, this, of course, was not something that Hitch would subscribe to. If he wanted to do a close-up, he was going to do a close-up, and if the background went out of focus, it's just too bad. But we filmed it entirely in VistaVision.
Robert Burks was Hitchcock's director of photography. This was their 5th collaboration. The first one had been Strangers on a Train. And by this time, they really were working very well together. Robert Burks knew exactly what Hitchcock wanted, and in composing the frames and in lighting To Catch a Thief, he did such a wonderful job that he was recognized and won the Academy Award for Best Color Cinematography.
The costumes were terribly important in this movie, and that's why he was so happy that he had Edith Head, who was not only a close friend, but a brilliant costumier. And she worked with him right through on the script. It wasn't up to the actress. I remember he had one actress who said, "Oh, I can't wear this." And Edith said, "Yes, you can," because she and my father had already gone over all of this.
The first time we were shooting, they start with Cary Grant, and they presented the costume to Hitchcock to know if it was okay for the beginning of the film. We shot it in 1954, but the film is supposed to take part after the war, between 1948, 47, 48, 49. And I was astonished to see that he had a shirt with buttonholes on the collar, and this was very modern. It was American shirt. I said, it's funny because in France you didn't have this kind of shirt. And Hitchcock heard it, and he said, no more this shirt. And that's why in the film he is wearing striped pullover with a red foulard.
One thing that Cary Grant often did was he would show up on the set the next day with pages of script that he had gone over, and he would say to Hitchcock, "Hitch, I have an idea." Now Hitchcock, who was very meticulous in preparing his films, he didn't want to start making changes while they were on the set, so he would palm him off to John Michael Hayes and say, "Well, listen, talk to John. If it's okay with John, we'll make the change." But he had told John Michael Hayes, "Listen, just delay him. I don't want to make any changes right now. Delay him until it's too late and we'll have to shoot the scene as is." Now, Cary Grant was being put off, and he was good-humored and good-natured about it, until one day it was something that he really felt strongly about. And he went to Hitchcock and said, "Could we just please try it my way once, and we'll try it your way?" Well, Hitchcock agreed, but what he had done was he primed the crew, and he told them in advance that they were going to try it both ways. So they ran the scene Cary Grant's way, and right after that they ran it Hitchcock's way, at the end of which the entire crew, from the lighting boys to the grips to the sound crew, burst into applause. Now, Cary Grant just kind of looked flustered and said, "Well, Hitch, I guess you're right. We'll do it your way." Later on, he told them that he had primed the crew, but he was good-natured.
We were always curious about where Hitch was going to appear. In fact, we'd ask early in the start of the film, say, "Well, Hitch, where are you going to be? I don't see anything where you can fit in just right." And he said, "Well, I'm not sure yet. I haven't made up my mind yet, but you know, when the time comes, we'll figure it out." But I suspect that he always had a notion about where he would show up. But it was always fun.
I used to really enjoy, and my sisters did too, waiting to see where my grandfather would show up in his films. Once the television series was on, my grandfather became very recognizable as a director, and my sisters and I would be driving in the car with him, and people would be in the car next to us and would look over at him and smile and wave, and he would say to us, "Are those friends of yours?" just as a joke. So he got to the point where he really was so recognizable, but was always so gracious to anyone who came up to him. I think my grandmother was such a strong force to my grandfather, both professionally and emotionally. He really loved her just so, extraordinarily, and he had her by his side. She was a very strong force by his side, very quiet, but a very strong force to him. And she was the one person who really understood him more than anyone.
In To Catch a Thief, Alma was also contributing in small ways as well. The chase sequence in To Catch a Thief, where Cary Grant and Grace Kelly are in the car and they're being followed by the police, John Michael Hayes wrote this long sequence of dialogue, and she suggested how they break it up. They're in the car at first, and they have part of the dialogue takes place in the car, and then part of the dialogue takes place when they get to one of the villas, and then another part of the dialogue takes place when they get to the picnic.
You're just not convincing, John. You're like an American character in an English movie.
And so Alma brought her editing skills to work in breaking up that sequence. Otherwise, it would have been a very lengthy dialogue sequence, which Hitchcock really abhorred. He always referred to that as pictures of people talking, and he did not like to make those kind of movies.
At the end of the film, I always ask the actor and the director to sign the front page of the script. And Cary Grant wrote something very nice, and Hitchcock, he scratched his name, director Hitchcock, and put director Sylvette Baudreau. He always did the profile with his big cheek and signed Hitchcock. As Cary Grant left, I had this letter at the Carlton Hotel in my keyhole, and he wrote, "Dear Sylvette, alas, I live in a hurry without opportunity to get you a little present of remembrance and appreciation. So, instead, please be a dear and get yourself something you may prefer. You have my happiest thoughts and gratitude. Au revoir, Cary Grant." Vous voulez? Alors, he wrote it in French the good way, and then he wrote it voulez, because it's the English pronunciation. It's the word he was supposed to say in the market flower sequence. And there was French money in it, so I bought something as he said, be a dick and get yourself something you may prefer. And I bought a striped T-shirt, like the one he had in the film.
When the first unit work, as we call it, was finished in the south of France, Hitch and Grace and Carrie came back to Paramount and picked up filming the interiors. And the second unit, or the helicopter unit, continued on in the south of France, and I stayed on with that unit as their production manager. And naturally, you did not want to shoot all of that material over day after day after day with the principals, and with Hitch being there and with Carrie and Grace being there. So we used doubles, naturally, and Hitch asked if we couldn't shoot with a helicopter. Not much in the way of filming had been done with a helicopter up to that point. So it was very crudely done in a way. We took a door off of the side of the helicopter and tied it in with ropes and cables and wires and so forth, then shot. There were some pretty scary moments for the chopper pilot and the cameraman, I can tell you.
John Michael Hayes had an ending that he wanted to use, where they would return to the picnic location, and they're kissing, and they're not really paying attention to anything except each other. And the car suddenly begins to roll forward, and they continue kissing. Finally, Grace says, "John," "Yes, dear," he says. She says, "Would you mind putting your foot on the brake?" He says, "All right." And the last shot would have been the front end of the car hanging over the cliff. But John Michael Hayes just couldn't convince Hitchcock to do it.
I think my grandfather had happy endings in his films, but there always had to be that little bit of a twist to it. Even though at the end of the film you have everything happy and everything wonderful and Cary Grant and Grace Kelly together, you still have that little twist of, well, Mother's going to love it here.
So this is where you live. Oh, Mother will love it up here.
So I think he brought everything, his humor and everything into this one picture. George Tomasini had been an editor on so many of my grandfather's films, and he was the editor on To Catch a